Welcome. You are listening to Purpose Driven Wealth, the podcast for empowered investors. If you're an investor who is tired of playing the Wall Street casino, stay tuned. On this show, we bring on industry experts to discuss leading strategies to help you make empowered decisions with your hard-earned capital. And now, here is your host, Bina.
Welcome to Purpose Driven Wealth. I'm your host, Bina. Today on the show, we have David Ginhoven. David works with the Land Profit Generator, which is a boutique, family-oriented organization specializing in land flipping. David, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for letting me in here. I was so excited to get on here and just explain a little bit about what we're doing with the Land Profit Generator. And, obviously I'm here in Dallas, Texas, and I'm from Florida. I was expecting to get a cowboy hat and drive a truck, but I got a truck. I'm just not wearing a cowboy hat for everybody. But yeah, it's a lot of fun what we're doing with the Land Profit Generator. I'm so excited to get into a little bit about that and just kind of explain some options going into this new economy and what that looks like and what we can do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Let's start off by kind of maybe talking a little bit about if you mind sharing a little bit about your background and also how you became involved in land flipping.
Sure. Yeah, good question. Much like a lot of people out there, I was super obsessed with finding the perfect business model. That's really the genesis of everything that I've ever done with land flipping. Was I just really wanted to figure out the perfect business model for me. I have a good friend of mine. He's really into numbers. He really likes all the logistics part of investing. So he kind of leans more towards this and I lean more towards that, right? And the reason is because I really like fast startup. I like simplicity, and I really want to make sure that I'm not going to mess it up too, right? So I didn't have a background in finance. I did not have a background in anything much more than construction in the transportation industry. And I remember that I was actually, and I loved the service industry, but I actually hurt my foot one day, and I got really scared. And I started looking at myself in a mirror, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm generally healthy. I'm generally consider myself pretty educated. I'm motivated. Why am I still living in a one-bedroom apartment and I have a broken foot? And if I don't go to work, I don't get paid. And that really, really scared me. And so at that point, I started on my path of looking for the best business model, number one, and the best business model for me, number two. And where I landed was obviously real estate. There's so much growth and potential and opportunity in real estate. But when I went to my first real estate meeting with realtors, I felt that was like the number one place to get started. And in Dallas, they said that there's 68,000 registered real estate agents in the city of Dallas alone. And I literally stood up and I walked back to my truck and I just drove home, really dejected. Okay. And so, but I did not give up on my dream of getting started and investing as a whole and finding a niche within real estate. Right. And so when I found land flipping, I was just so attracted to it. Number one, because not a lot of people were doing it. Number two, it's completely virtual. And number three, the startup cost that it actually takes to get a deal and sell a deal and get going with this is by far, in my opinion, 10 times cheaper than anything else. And the risk involved, especially with not having the education and network and support and background, like a lot of my competition I felt with houses, is in land flipping, there's not a lot of risk because there's not a lot of people doing it. And if you're using the right contracts that hopefully we can get into later, if you're using the right contracts and the right strategy, if the deal goes sideways, then we can cancel the contract. So one of the things that I like to explain is it's very much like option trading without worrying about if it gets shorted, you have to pay 10x more, right? So if you lose the deal, you don't have to pay, right? Because this is how the deal is structured. That if I'm not putting money in the deal and deposit in escrow or earnest money, and I can cancel it anytime, I now have all the leverage now. So that's really what attracted me to it. And that's why I aligned myself with the Land Profit Generator. And I actually reached out to them. And I've been a land flipper for 6 years now. And I've been helping the Land Profit Generator for about 2 years now. And it's a lot of fun because I feel like this is a purpose-driven life now, just like you talk a lot about. It's a purpose-driven life now that I feel like my mission is to help explain, educate, and support people getting out of the rat race, that this can be their first investment strategy. And oftentimes it's just buying a house is their first investment strategy, right? But they can't really do anything with that until they build a lot of equity, right? Over a long period of time, right? Most times, right? And so with this, you could legitimately get going within 30 days, have deals under contract and deals sold within 30 days if you do it right. So yeah, that's why I'm here. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about that and kind of get into what makes a good investor and what makes a bad investor to make sure that anybody interested what to do next. Yeah.
Oh, great. That's beautiful. I love I love the purpose-driven part of your story as well too.
Thank you.
Let's start with the basics.
Mhm.
As the name applies, land flipping.
Mhm.
But what are kind of like more the mechanics behind it and how it works? What's typically involved in land flipping?
Good question. Good question. So I was actually explaining this to my virtual assistant the other day, and a virtual assistant is someone that works for you. That's basically an employee that just like oversees, right? For everybody. But I was explaining this now, and the way I explain land flipping is that there's really only two kinds of real estate investing strategies. There's a whole bunch of niches in there, but there's only two. Okay. Number one is you get something and you buy it, and you add value to it and you sell it. Okay. That's, that could be residential, that could be houses, apartments, whatever. Okay. You're buying something and then you're selling something and you're adding value to it. And that's why you're able to sell it for a profit. Okay. That's most strategies out there, but that takes a lot of capital and it takes a lot of education, and you better make sure nothing goes wrong. Okay. So land flipping is where you're getting something for no money out of pocket. No earnest money, no deposit money, and we're tying it up in a contract. And that contract legally says that there's two major clauses on it. Number one, I can list it and I can sell it for a profit. And number two, I can back out for any time, for any reason at my discretion. So those two clauses in the contracts of land flipping gives us the ability now to do a lot of deals, especially now because we're not putting money in the deal, that I can do deals in areas that I'm not that comfortable with. I don't have to be an expert in, and I don't have to really worry about a lot of expectations. My job is just to get a whole bunch of deals under contract and worry about selling them. So that's what land flipping is, and we do that in a marketing strategy. And I get asked this a lot too. Is like, what is our strategy for getting deals? Well, I'll tell you a little bit later too. But quite honestly, people that own land, let's think about it. People that actually own land are generally, in my experience, my very professional experience, between the ages of 55 and 75 years old. Okay. Now, if you're in the ages of 55 to 75 years old and you own land, and you don't even live in that area and you're not using it, you're not living on it, odds are you bought it years ago for a certain reason. Now, after COVID, life gets in the way. You've had kids, grandkids, moved away. You've bought cars, sold cars, bought house. So maybe you're living in an apartment now. This is something that you're making payments on as far as property taxes for quite a while. And now you just want to get rid of it for at least what you paid for, but you just want this off your hands because you're not going to use it anymore. So the big difference on what we're doing, Mo, here with the land profit generator is that we're targeting the big surplus of people that own land and they're not using it. What most investors do in other groups and other strategies is they're targeting people that we call red flag properties, like the tax delinquents, the foreclosures, the violation law, like the planning and zoning department gave them a fee for not cutting their grass, right? So that's really only 1% of the properties out there. What I'm going after is the 99% of the properties that's not listed with a realtor. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nobody beating them down for owed taxes. So these are the people that are just making property taxes every year and they're just going about their life. So, but most investors, they're fighting over that 1%. So if you're thinking about it, guys, that's 99% of the investors fighting over 1% of the market. That's why it's so competitive there. What we're doing is we're focusing on the 99% of the market that has no problems. It's owned free and clear, and they're just not using it. And that's why strategically we have less competition, and it's faster and it's easier to target people and get a response from them and negotiate with them, and oftentimes get deals under contract for anywhere between 10 and 33 cents on a dollar. And that's really what we're doing. We're getting deals under contract for a very low price, and then when we sell it, most times I just want to be cheaper than the guy that, you know, the other guy in the marketplace. And so it's easier for me to sell. It's easier for me to get. I'm making a profit margin, and I'm doing it without money out of pocket. And so, yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Interesting. I'm curious about the two clauses you mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, the one being that you can back out at any time, and the second one being that you can actually sell the property. So what would somebody on the, let's say I'm a landowner, and you approach me and you've asked me, hey, you know, like, I'm interested in your property and here's a contract, and you have these two clauses in it. What is it that makes sellers agreeable, or property or the landowner agreeable to basically have these clauses in there that allows you so much flexibility in order to basically get out of it when you want, or perhaps even just sell it at that point? Because doesn't that somehow put them at a slight disadvantage in a way? Because if you can back out whenever you want, is there any type of flexibility on the landowner's side as far as what they can do? Or is it kind of tie back into the fact that you just said they've had this property for a while and they're just kind of maybe, you know, now that you've approached them, you've kind of like said, hey, you know, like, I'm willing to take this off your hands. Yeah. And so now they don't really regard those two clauses as being kind of disadvantages or drawbacks. So I'm kind of really curious about how that kind of plays together, and how it kind of comes together on your end.
Great question. So I know there must be a lot of realtors out there that are asking sort of the same questions too. I get this question especially from realtors because they're really looking for those clauses in the contract, right? Now, the creator, if I can back this up a little bit, the creator of our system, his name is Jack Bosch. He's been doing deals for 20 years and he's been teaching people how to do it for 15. He's done over 5,000 deals all over the country, from Hawaii down to Florida, okay? He's also a broker, okay? And he understands the contract law, and we have formulated this agreement template that we generally use in all 50 states. So the contract template that we use, you can add, you can make amendments to it, but it works in all 50 states, number one, okay? Number two, it's only a template, and that and there's another amazing clause on there that I absolutely love, that I'm hoping people really consider why this is so valuable, is we get it under contract for 6 months. Okay. Now, when we get it under contract for 6 months and somebody might have a question or a problem with any of those clauses, okay, number one, what we say to them is, okay, we're just getting it under contract for 6 months, generally because I don't want to have to come back to you, since the title agents work from home, the counties work from home. I haven't scheduled a survey, a due diligence, an inspection. I haven't done any of that stuff yet, but I can't do anything without getting it on a contract, right? So generally in real estate, because people are backed up, because there's so much demand and there's so much transactions now, this is not a 30-day close like it used to be. Most times it's 45, 60-day closes for anything now in real estate. So number one, I just want the leverage point of 6 months, number one. And then number two, now, if they have a super problem about that, absolutely, I can come down on that. But we want all the leverage in our court. That's why the templates that we use puts all the leverage, the ball on our side of the court, right? Now, also what we say to them is, that's not standard in land to hand out earnest money, hand out deposits, put any money in escrow until it is inspected and there is due diligence and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the culture of houses is to put $500 in earnest money, quite simply because if a realtor is going to do all this work, they want to make sure that the buyer actually is going to close on it. So that is a cultural thing within the realtor community. There's nothing that states that you absolutely have to put a $500 deposit. It could be $100, $1,000, whatever the realtor decides in a house. But in land, we don't have that, right? So it's very transactionary. And we're not dealing with a selling agent. That's why we're dealing with the seller only. Okay. So that's also where we get around the hard negotiation of all these nitpicking of the clauses and everything, because we're going to the seller and we're saying, listen, we want to buy your property, but there is a due diligence period. There is an inspection period. We do want to do our title work. And quite simply, without already having a connection with your title agent, or I'm sorry, your title agent in your county, we just want to make sure that this is not taking more time than what we need, right? So that it's all templated. We usually don't have a problem with it at all. I would say 15% of the time that we do, I will absolutely come down on the close time, right? Like 4 months, but I don't ever put any more money needed than $100 if I absolutely have to on a contract. So yeah, to answer your question, it's generally people that own land, they're not using it, and they just want to have something signed, and the consideration is the price for the super analytical contract law people. The consideration is the price in the contract, and that's what makes what we're doing for the past 20 years viable in every single state.
Gotcha. That totally makes sense. And also the point that you mentioned too, that you don't have agents and brokers involved to know all the language. So I could totally see that if there was somebody like that involved, that, they would kind of push back and be like, hey, like everything's all on your side in terms of the leverage and so forth, and everything's at your advantage. But like you said, you also need to do due diligence, and you need to do investigation work as well too, to figure out like, hey, is this going to pan out? Is this deal favorable?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of what we're doing is if anybody's interested in doing this and getting started, obviously you can go to learnlandflippingpodcast.com. But if you focus just on partnering with developers, right? If you just see yourself as, I'm just going to go get deals, right? And you want to partner with developers, I have developers that I partner with. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I don't even do deals in Dallas, Texas. I've done deals in 18 states from Hawaii to South Carolina. I don't even do deals in Dallas, but I have done quite a few deals in Houston, which is 4 hours away. And I know developers down there, and we got a deal under contract for $1.2 million. And we have a buyer for 2.5, but we were demanding 18 months under contract for this deal. Okay. And quite simply because we wanted to make sure that my developer that was going to buy it can actually put 350 doors. It's going to be a $35 million project for him. So for me, it doesn't cost me anything to ask, right? And as investors, we always want as much leverage as we possibly can in the deal. And as long as we're using the right contracts and we're doing it the right process, then, if we have all the leverage, then now we can take our time and we can do it correctly with the right people.
Okay. And so how do you go about finding your deals?
Good question. So when I first started is a lot different than, how I actually explain now, right? Because when I first started, I just wanted to take just enough education to get a deal done, right? And I just wanted to get it done. And I want to go into the Facebook group like, I'm a land flipper, right? But what separates a good investor and a bad investor is you're actually doing the data, the logistics part live before you actually do the marketing, right? So we do marketing, okay? And so if we just said, okay, I want to do a deal in Texas, okay? Now where in Texas? Okay, now let's decide that. It would probably take me like maybe 4 hours to figure that out, but we're doing a lot of numbers on supply and demand, and path of growth is the key word with land wholesalers and flippers. It's path of growth areas. Okay. So most people might be listening to this and, you might live in a city or an apartment or a house or whatever, but if you're thinking about a city and you're thinking about how it expands, right? It can't expand inward. It can't like develop like a subdivision of houses like right downtown. There's already buildings there, right? So it has to expand out, okay? And generally when it expands out, it goes along the highways, okay? So when it goes along the highways and you start seeing all these subdivisions pop up and pop out, you can start to see the path of growth is what we say. So if you actually went to learnlandflippingpodcast.com, and you can actually schedule a call with me personally, but I would be sharing resources to you on how you can get started too. But that path of growth is the highest opportunity of picking out areas before we do our marketing. Because if you know that odds are I can spend $1,000 and make $20,000 in this neighborhood, or I could spend $1,000 and make $5,000 in this neighborhood. Most times you would pick that I want to spend $1,000 in marketing to make 20, right? So that logistics part is not just the supply and demand. It's a little bit more about the development and path of growth of the city commissioners and stuff like that, and the developers that are building houses and that gaps, right? Because are they expanding out 100 miles or just 50 miles, right? And so where we get the biggest high return profit margin is in that path of growth. Okay, so I focus on, there's 3 places that you can focus on land flipping. Okay, 3 property locations. So downtown city infill lots, right? You go to a neighborhood and you see house, and you see like an empty lot, and then you see like a mailbox, but there's no house right there, right? It's already developed. There's already a sidewalk, right? And then you got the path of growth. Okay, so you got like, you're developing out, and then you have like these newer subdivisions, and you start to see like, okay, there's like 1 house for every 20 open lots or every 5 open lots, right? You're starting to see there's developing there, but it's just not completely built out. And then you got the rural areas. And the rural areas, in my opinion, is the fastest, easiest place to get started, because this is where farms are getting bought out by developers and people like me that chop it up. Like, imagine like 100-acre farm that gets bought and chopped up and then developed, and then now they start filling that in. But oftentimes this is where you get your best bang on your buck on marketing, because people that if you buy land, it's very much like you're buying in bulk, right? You're buying per acre, right? And when you start to subdivide it or develop it or anything like that, that's the bigger upside later on. So those are the 3 areas that you want to target first. And then if you actually reached out to me personally, I can help you with the rest. But that's why is that marketing strategy. And so we target those people specifically, and then we just make it easier by going into an area and say, okay, there's 100,000 people in this path of growth. What 2,000 people do we want to market? And that's what this whole process is at the Land Profit Generator, is identifying those 2,000 best prospects out of 120,000 people. So yeah, that is a process right there. And that's what we're really good at, is identifying interested sellers that would sell for a discount, but it's not listed on the market.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. And thank you for getting into the details of that as well. That really helps, and kind of understand what you do on your end. And you've mentioned the marketing piece. Like, what exactly does that entail? Are you sending out mailers? Are you calling people? Are you doing both? Sending out emails? How exactly are you doing the marketing portion of all this?
Good question. So we'll just run through it real quick. I think there's might be 4 ways of marketing people. So you'll never get anybody's email. Okay, that's like the hardest thing in the world to do. Okay, so let's just cross out email. Okay, so now you can call and you can text. Okay, now like I was saying earlier, most people that own land, that they've owned it for quite a long time, is they're 55 to 75 years old. So most of those people do not have cell phones. And if they do have cell phones, it's definitely not, it's very hard to find. Okay. So even if you are skip tracing and calling those people, it's going to cost you more money. It's going to take longer. You're actually going to have to do a lot of work, right? And a lot of hard negotiating. And you're probably only going to get like a 20% success rate. So there's a very low success rate on that, and there's a lot of output, right? So what we do is we just want the interested sellers to call us. So that's the magic of the system at Land Profit Generator. We want the interested sellers to call us. So how do we do that? We send mail to them, because we know if they pay taxes on that property, we have their mailing address. So that's how we do it. So we go get their mailing address from the county and a little bit of extra stuff, and we send marketing out there, and we don't want to tell them a price, right? So I actually want to sell my house for a certain dollar amount, but I've been offered as much as $4,000 less than that actual dollar amount. I'm not calling them. I'm not calling them unless they give me that exact dollar amount. So I took that kind of psychology as well, Mo, and I was like, man, if I was a seller of land and somebody told me I want to buy your property for $28,300, well, what if I just want to sell it for $30,000, right? I'm not going to call them, right? So what we do is we have like a very neutral letter And the whole point of marketing is to get leads, right? So we want as many leads to call us as possible. We're going to qualify them later. So that's what we do. We send out direct mail marketing, and we want the leads to call us with no expectation of price just yet. And then we want to qualify them. So we don't want to do all the homework of 2,000 people and do all the comps and all that stuff. That would take you years, right? So we just want to do the comps and the offers to people that are interested in selling. And we want to make sure that we qualify them just a little bit before we send them a contract too. Yeah, that's our plan.
So your mailer essentially is just kind of arousing their curiosity, right? So it's
absolutely.
Like, hey, I'm interested in something that you own. If you're interested in selling, contact me and we can discuss. I assume that's more or less kind of the gist of your mailer that you're sending out, right?
Yeah, good point. I mean, I've studied marketing as well quite a bit before I started this as well. And I really felt I had really good ideas for marketing. But when I had a conversation with Jack Bosch, the creator of the system, the land profit generator, he told me how much money he paid in copywriting and lawyer fees for the contracts and the marketing material itself that we use and everything. And we started to calculate how many deals that our students have done. And it's a lot. Okay. It's a lot. So I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to change anything. I'm just going to put my name on it and send it out. So yeah, we've proven that this system has worked. And that's also why people are attracted to it, is because it's almost like a franchise model. It's like, okay, if it's almost like, if you want to buy a McDonald's, you literally have to graduate McDonald's University before you are allowed to sell a Big Mac, right? And that's kind of the same thing with our program. Is like, we are literally showing you how to pick out an area, how to do this, and how to send out the marketing, and use this, by the way, and just put your name here. So it's pretty simplified, and that's why I like it too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's basically everything's been systematized, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so what are the characteristics of a good or a favorable land deal? What are you looking for?
Good question. Okay. Obviously there's demand, right? But oftentimes most people that I do deals with, and most people that I know do deals with, the owners of the property do not live in the area. Okay. So if I can just tell a really quick story, Joe and Mary, they live in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they just inherited a property from Pappy, and Pappy's property is in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, Joe and Mary have never been to the property. They didn't even know that Pappy owned a property, okay? So when they see a letter from me, they're like, wow, it's almost like free money, okay? So maybe I could sell it for more. Maybe I could do my investigation, and maybe I could, maybe I can get top dollar. But does that mean I have to drive up there? Do I have to meet him in person? Like, do I have to hire a realtor? Do I have to invest in this deal? All I know is that David wants to offer me $28,000 for this deal right now. So most times, people that live outside that county of that property, and they've owned it for over 10 years, okay, and it's in a path of growth, and there's demand. Those are really we have about 26 of them, right? But those are 4 really good indicators that we are going to make quite a bit on that deal very easily. And so now if we targeted 2,000 of those people, just like that, with the same kind of property, now all of a sudden it becomes easier, okay? And so I'd say the path of growth and demand, a seller that lives outside the city, they've owned it for quite a long time. And if they've owned it generally for over 2 years, they're not going to develop it. By our calculations, if people own land for over 2 years and they're not building on it yet, they're not going to. So it just means that this is just something extra that they have. And, I'll hold on to it until somebody wants to buy it. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I want to get into some of the risks as well too.
Yeah.
Although it's from our earlier discussion, a lot of that's kind of been mitigated through the contracts and the clauses, right? But assuming that those clauses that we talked about, for example, having 6 months or more, being able to back out any time, if those are written into the contract, what other types of risks essentially could possibly be there for investors when it comes to land flipping? What kind of mistakes, I guess, can they potentially make?
Great question. I think there should only be 2, right? So if you decide this is a good deal and you evaluate it, right, and you evaluated it wrong, like if you thought this property had more demand and you thought it was worth more than what it was, you're going to put it on the market and maybe you don't sell it, or it's going to take you longer to sell it, right? So the sales cycle could be a lot more extended, because the big advantage that we have is the huge advantage that we have is that this system, you have to be trained on evaluating the price of land, right? So Zillow and realtors, they just punch an address in like a system and it spits out a number, right? Well, you can't really do that with land. So you will not be able to be a land investor unless you actually have the skill set of evaluating price, right? So if you're evaluating price too high or too low, that can cause you problems, because now you're stuck with a whole bunch of contracts. But hopefully, if you listen to me and Land Profit Generator, you didn't have any money in the deal, but you just might not make as much, right? I would say number 2 is marketing dollars, okay? It really breaks my heart when I see people get started with this and they don't follow the instructions. That's also why I'm doing this podcast, because I really sympathize with people that want to get started, but they might not be actually taking the training, right? And so taking the training is really like a step-by-step fail-safe, right? Make sure that it has this many properties for sale. Make sure that there's this many properties that have sold in the last 6 months, right? If they're not doing that, then they're just kind of guessing, and you might as well just go to Vegas, right? And so you could spend $10,000 in marketing and not get a deal. If you're looking for farmland on Miami Beach, you're not going to get a deal, right? If you're looking for beachfront property in Lincoln, Nebraska, you're not going to get a deal, right? So if you're just following the system, like we teach and we show, we actually have a Facebook group as well, where we have over 19,000 people in it, called the Land Profit Generator, that's open to the public, right? And that's where we can even, we go live. As a matter of fact, I went live earlier today there on some tips and tricks on how to get started as well. But if you're spending money in the wrong places, and you're pricing the properties wrong, that is what could be the death of any investor as a land flipper. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I could totally see that, because sending out those mailers, that can be pretty costly, right?
Yeah. So I pay 50 cents a letter, okay? And usually I do campaigns of about $1,000 a piece, okay? So out of $1,000 a piece, I'm targeting 2,000 leads, okay? Now, out of 2,000 leads, I'm targeting anywhere between 5 and 15 deals closed. So not responses, but like closed, money in the bank. So that's pretty much what my numbers are. That's what my expectations are. And that's how I budget for my business as well. For anybody getting started, you can get started for campaigns as low as $500 to start testing counties. And that's what we do. That's what we teach at the Land Profit Generator. Is we teach, one time, Mo, I had a guy, he was he's American, but he was living in Malaysia. And he said, I came to Malaysia with $1 million and now I have $10 million. Okay, what do I do with it? And I said, well, my advice to you is to do the same thing as somebody that has $10,000 in the bank. And that's just start out doing 1 or 2 deals with as low money in marketing as possible, right? So what we teach is we're going to teach you how to pick out an area. And we're just going to test it, right? We're just going to send a $500 campaign there, and we want to see a response, right? We want to see a response to make sure that there's actually people that want to sell there. Now, hopefully we can get a deal there with $500, but if we get a lot of responses, we know this is a good area. Now we're going to go back in that area and we're going to invest more money. So that's how we make sure that we don't lose on our marketing, is we're testing these little at like $500 a piece, and make it simpler and easier for anybody to get started, making sure they're not spending too much money before they start making money.
Without giving away any of your secret sauce, how do people start out by figuring out where they're going to start? What area they're going to start with sending out, mailers and spending $500? Is it typically somewhere close to where they live in an area that they're familiar with, or are there other metrics and other things that they kind of look out or look for in terms of trying to figure out where that first area is that they're gonna target and focus on?
Yeah, good question. So it goes in from, if you want the highest response rate, which I feel like if you're getting started first, you want the highest response rate and work your way down, right? So if you're thinking in terms of competition and response rate, rural properties generally have the least amount of competition and the highest amount of response. So I always advise going there. Now, remember, there's 3, there's rural, there's path of growth, and there's city info lot, right? So what I advise is rural properties have the easiest and fastest and most amount of response rate. And then there's path of growth, and then there's city info lots, okay? So if you had like an equation, you can expect to probably close maybe 5 times as many deals in a rural area compared to a city area for the same amount of dollars in marketing. Okay. So generally what we're looking for is sellability. Okay. And so we have over 26 criterias on picking a county in an area. But generally, when we're evaluating this, we do this right before the marketing, but we actually spend money on marketing. And it usually takes about an hour, maybe 2 hours to do this for each campaign, but then you're done. Then you're done for like a whole 2 weeks, right? So a good hour or two, and now you're just waiting for sellers to call you, right? So the biggest advice and strategy and secret sauce is the path of growth along the highway structure. Okay, so generally we're looking at highways and how they expand from the area and where are they going. And if I see a city here, and I know people on the podcast can't see my hands, but if you see like a city in the middle, and then you see like a highway go out, okay, and then you see like a city form, like maybe an hour and a half outside, right? So that gap in between these two cities is what we call a path of growth. That right there is definitely the number one where we should start looking for land, because the people are starting to progress along that highway structure and subdivisions in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so for people who want to learn more about land flipping and what's involved with that, how can they do so?
Good question. Well, go to learnlandflippingpodcast.com. There you'll actually get some free resources. I will direct you where you need to go first to get started. And if you want to talk to me personally, you can actually schedule a call with me. Now, how I actually help, and I work with the Land Profit Generator. Now, I'm a land investor. I took the program over 6 years ago, and I've been helping out and spreading the word about land flipping for the past 2 years. We actually have, some events virtually throughout the year, and we actually have resources too for you to get started and learn the concepts and getting started and making sure you're doing it correctly for totally free. Okay. And we also have a Facebook group called the Land Profit Generator, where there's over 19,000 people currently in there as well. And that's where you can network. That's where you can see people post their deals. You can ask them how they're doing, right? I can't give out people's name, phone numbers, and emails for you to solicit to, right? But if they post in there, you absolutely can reach out to them. So we have a very free a place, and really it's a lot of good investors in there. And that's something I'm really proud about, that the actual creator of the system, Jack Bosch, created land flipping over 20 years ago. And he's even in there answering questions about what to do next and how to get started. So it's something I'm really proud of. I'm so happy I took the time and educated myself in, and it paid off. And I'm hoping I can get to meet you too. Yeah. LearnLandFlippingPodcast.com.
Okay, great. And we'll also provide a link to that as well too in the show notes when this interview goes live.
Great.
Well, thank you, David, for coming on to the show today.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mo. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. You provided an amazing amount of value to the audience, and everyone else. Thank you. That's all for today. And until next time, have a great week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's show. If you are interested in learning how alternative investments can help you build purpose-driven wealth, sign up on the High Rise Capital website to receive our monthly newsletter and free investor ebook. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Thank you for listening to Purpose Driven Wealth, the podcast for empowered investors.